When somebody goes hunting, they're normally right smack in the middle of a forest or the woods, completely devoid of other people. Seems like the perfect setting for a horror story, right? These 3 supposedly true stories will show you just what can go wrong while hunting. This first story was submitted to me in June by somebody named Robert Cherneman. His story takes place upstate New York, a place I'm familiar with. Here's his story. I've been a passionate hunter ever since my dad before me started taking me out on trips every Saturday, and I thought I would pass down the same tradition to my son. During the setting of this story, my son Peter was 10 years old. I figured that was a good age to introduce him to the world of hunting. I armed Peter and myself with Remington Model 798 sniper rifles, however I carried it until I found the spot where I usually find game. We could have used the deer hunting tower hidden deeper in the woods, but I figured that wouldn't be the best first-time experience. I handed him the gun when we were set up. I had already taught him the basics of firearms, so it wasn't like I was taking him out there with no experience. I chose to stay put the first time as it would be easier for him, and I figured I would move up to the more advanced methods of hunting in the future sessions. There was a lot of waiting, more waiting than usual in this certain spot. I could see Peter was getting bored, constantly yawning and sighing, and that disappointed me. I didn't want him to think this sport was that boring, so I packed up our stuff and told him we're moving. He seemed to perk up a bit with excitement, and that made me happy. As soon as we began walking, I heard footsteps. I put my arm in front of Peter silently and motioned for him to raise his gun. He did with excitement, until I spotted someone's head peer out from around a tree in the distance. I pushed the gun down immediately, a bit disappointed, but also relieved that Peter didn't shoot. I gave him a quick little apologetic wave, and with that, he disappeared back behind the tree out of sight. Was he another hunter? I couldn't tell, but from what I saw of him, even in the distance, there was something off-putting about his face. I couldn't put my finger on what it was at that moment. Seeing somebody this deep into the woods was rare and also strange, and this guy didn't exactly look like a hunter. So, as a safety precaution, I suppose, I steered Peter in the other direction. Still no sign of any deer. Peter asked me about the man, like who I thought he was, for example, as expected, and I just told him I didn't know, and I didn't think we should get closer. I didn't want to lie to him. A few minutes later, Peter started complaining that he was hungry. I was getting pretty hungry myself, so we stopped and unpacked our snacks. I was extremely disappointed that nothing had happened by now. While eating my sandwich, I heard footsteps again in the distance. Peter did too, as he immediately picked up his rifle and pointed it in that direction. I felt my heart drop when I could see the same man from before peering out from another tree at us. I lowered Peter's gun again, and I noticed he seemed a bit uncomfortable now, as was I. I told him to wait there while I began to walk over to the man, trying to emotionally prepare myself to confront him. About halfway over, I stopped and thought to myself, what the hell am I doing? My son is right over there. I turned around and hurried back to Peter, telling him it's time to go. If you had your son in the middle of the woods and you thought you were being stalked, odds are you would just want to get out of there too. We were not running, we were merely walking back to the road. I was mentally waiting for a twig snap or a leaf crunch from behind us, and when it happened, I nudged Peter to go along ahead. I angrily turned around and stormed towards the man, who was once again peering from behind a tree. I'd say when I got within 30 feet from the tree, he moved back behind the tree out of sight, and then I heard a thud, as if something were just dropped onto the ground. I had my gun loaded in my hand as I cautiously walked up to the tree. I didn't even say a word. I don't know why. All I did was slowly creep up to the tree, and when I got there, I felt as if everything around me had completely collapsed, or rather ceased to exist, and all that I could focus on was the head laying face first on the ground in front of me. No body, just head. I didn't even look up or around the tree to see who had dropped it there. I just full on sprinted back to Peter and told him to run. We made it back home safely within 5 minutes, and I made 100% sure we weren't followed. However, I stayed up the whole night keeping watch for the sake of my family's safety. I found out the next day through my wife that there had been 2 disappearances of local hunters, and that's when I called the police and reported what I had experienced. I had to, of course, play it safe for a long time, at least a few months, before taking my son out again. What baffles me, though, is how this person managed to kill 2 hunters who obviously had to be armed with some kind of weapon. I have since resumed hunting with my son. The next story was submitted to me just a month ago by Nathan Zielinski, and it's more of a mix between a camping and a hunting story. Here it is. It was my first time hunting. I was 21, going with my friends Anthony, Christian, Tom, and his girlfriend Diana to some park in Colorado to go elk hunting. We brought 2 separate tents that were relatively large, sleeping bags, 2 days worth of food and drinks, and of course, guns. I couldn't even tell you the name of the gun Anthony handed me. It was just a basic looking hunting rifle. Honestly, I didn't know how I felt about the whole thing. Killing a living, breathing animal that has just as much of a will to live as me, merely for so-called fun, didn't seem cool to me. But it was like the 5th time Anthony offered, and I felt like I had to say yes. I decided I wouldn't shoot any animals about halfway through the car ride. Anthony pulled into a lot, we unpacked the car, and proceeded to hike about a mile into the woods before setting up camp. First thing after setting up camp, we all followed Anthony's lead as he proudly babbled on about hunting techniques. I wished I had someone to laugh about it with, but everyone else seemed serious about it as well. I tried busting Anthony's chops by asking him, "Wouldn't it be better to stop talking if you don't want to scare away any potential prey?" He got pissed. I could tell he took this really seriously, and from there on, I shut up. And by there on, I mean however long things were going normal, and that wasn't long. During our hunt, we ran into a rather strange group of people. 3 rather large, dirty men with long, sticky hair. They looked like they belonged to some kind of inbreeding house deep in the woods. They looked at us and sort of nodded their heads as if to say hello as we passed by them, one by one. We were officially freaked out. It might sound like something that would be laughable, but under the circumstances, it was horrifying. We were deep in the woods, far from the lot, which was, for the record, completely empty, and it may sound exaggerated, but these 3 looked like creepy lowlives who could be dangerous. Thankfully, though, they didn't follow us, which allowed for us to peacefully go on with our hunt. Anthony ended up killing a deer. We didn't find any elks. We dragged the deer all the way back to our campsite, and that was actually our dinner for the night. Anthony and Tom went through a disgusting, bloody process of skinning, and I'm pretty sure gutting the deer, but I didn't watch for more than a few seconds. Anthony made us venison burgers. He came prepared with the buns and everything. While I didn't particularly agree with the sport, I was impressed with Anthony. We went to sleep first thing at dark with the fire still going outside. I was having a really bad time trying to get comfortable in that sleeping bag. Anthony and Christian seemed to fall asleep quickly, while I, on the other hand, had to be rolling around for at least 2 hours. I've always had a hard time falling asleep in sleeping bags. I was actually about to get up and go outside to pee when I heard footsteps coming from outside the tent. I opened my mouth to call out Tom or Diana's name, but I realized, what if it wasn't them? I laid silently and listened. In an unexpected instant, the zipper to our tent got pulled down, and I threw my head down to the side and acted as if I were asleep. There was a short pause before the zipper got pulled back up. I waited until the pairs of footsteps moved away. They seemed to be moving to Tom and Diana's tent. Then I realized it must have been them, and they must have been checking if we were asleep so they could, mess around, I guess. So I decided to play a little joke on them. I gave it about 5 minutes before I unzipped the tent and began creeping over to their tent. Then I realized their zipper was still undone. That's strange, I thought to myself. I crept over expecting to scare the 2 lovebirds, but instead, when I got close enough, I saw 2 men inside of the tent doing something to Diana. At that moment, I screamed as loud as I could, mostly out of fear, but also to wake everyone up. Anthony and Christian stormed out from the tent with their rifles. When the two men fled from the tent, I realized something. They were the same two men we had seen earlier. Tom and Anthony fired rounds in their direction to scare them off. However, something even more horrifying happened after that. After they shot their rounds, we all looked around us completely horrified as men in almost all directions who were previously hiding in bushes and behind trees were taking off in different directions. We tried waking up Tom and Diana, but they seemed to have been injected with some kind of tranquilizers by the men. We had no choice but to wait until they woke up, which took about maybe half an hour. Running back to the car in that pitch-black forest was one of the most horrifying moments of my life. We don't know who all those people were. They could have been part of some secluded inbreeding house for all we knew, or even some kind of cannibalistic family. We have no idea what they were planning on doing with Tom and Diana, but we're just happy we all got out of there safely. This last story was written by Jared the Sprinter, and he shares his night hunting experience. I was doing some night hog hunting in the woods near my backyard. I was hiding in the tower I had built about a decade ago. In case anyone's wondering, I of course had a night vision scope attachment. I guess I'm what you would consider a hardcore hunter. I don't want to bore you with the unnecessary story prolonging details, so I'll make this short. And I want everyone to know that though I agree this story sounds far-fetched and crazy, it is nothing but the truth. And I in a way actually consider myself lucky that I'll always have such a horrifying story to share. So, while I was sitting in the tower waiting for movement, it finally came. I took aim and found the source. But it wasn't at all a hog, or any kind of animal I was expecting. It was a person, a man wearing all black. Black sweatpants, black shoes, and a black hoodie with the hood over his head. But that wasn't the freakiest part. He was dragging a sack behind him. My heart started racing. I was pretty sure I was witnessing this guy trying to bury a body. I continued to watch him, but then he slowed down, and I swear to God, it looked as if he turned his head up to me. I ducked down under the wooden walls of the tower, shaking in my boots. Yes, I had a gun, but just the idea of using it against a person is horrifying. I lay low, praying to God that he hadn't seen me. It wouldn't make sense if he could, though. It's practically pitch black out here, or at least that was my logic. Seconds felt like an eternity as I waited for the footsteps in the leaves to move elsewhere, but I didn't hear any footsteps. All I heard was the sound of a foot hitting one of the wooden planks on the ladder of the tower. I felt the entire tower vibrate and shake as there were 2 more steps moving up the ladder. At this point, I was asking myself deep down, am I going to be able to shoot someone? But for some reason, whoever was down there decided not to climb all the way up, as I heard them jump back down to the forest ground and began dragging the sack away. I think I stayed frozen like a statue for at least 10 minutes before even peeking over the ledge again. The coast seemed clear. I had to get home and warn the police immediately. I hopped over the ledge and descended down the ladder. I turned on my pocket flashlight, which in hindsight was a stupid move considering the situation, and ran back in the direction of my house. I was only able to run for about 10 seconds or so when I heard the rapid, manic footsteps crunching the leaves from behind me. I took a look over my shoulder, and there he was, inches away from my face. I spun around and shot him in the shoulder. He stopped and screamed in agony, and I took that moment to finish my dash to my house. Again, in hindsight, I should have held him hostage somehow, but that doesn't even matter now. I called the police, who showed up within 15 minutes with a whole search squad, and I led them all into the woods to the exact location where I shot him. There was a faint yet noticeable blood trail spilled onto the leaves, which led past the body bag, which the cops seized, and eventually right to the maniac, who was hiding under a log next to a tree. He was arrested and tried for the murder of Jinquen Sakanaki, a Japanese corner store owner. I don't know the full story behind it, but I do know I won't forget this one for the rest of my life, and I'll also be telling it for the rest of my life. For the past 3 years, each January, there is a bizarre online puzzle game that is hosted by someone who calls themselves 3301. Their symbol is a cicada. The complex puzzles draw on elements of cryptography, mathematics, literature, hidden messages, data security, and philosophy. Physical clues appear in places as diverse as Poland, Hawaii, Spain, Australia, and Korea. 3301 claims that its puzzles attempt to find intelligent individuals. However, they don't say why. Many people believe these nearly impossible puzzles are a recruitment vehicle for organizations like the CIA or MI6. Beginning in late August, an anonymous 4chan user began posting hundreds of never-before-seen private photos of celebrities that were stolen from their hacked iCloud accounts. The victims were mostly female and high-profile, such as Jennifer Lawrence, Scarlett Johansson, Kim Kardashian, and Kate Upton are just a few women whose accounts were compromised. Apple confirmed the hackers had obtained the images by means of a targeted attack, though we still don't know who or how many attackers were involved. The FBI has since said they were looking into the case. Nearly 4 high school students disappeared in Mexico after police stopped them from traveling to a protest. The cops then reportedly handed over the students to a drug gang who investigators say killed them. However, their bodies have never been found. Nearly 80 people have been arrested following the kidnapping, including a mayor, his wife, and a local police chief. But without their bodies, the case remains unsolved. There's a 40-ton boulder located on the shores of the Taunton River in Massachusetts called the Dighton Rock, and it's covered in puzzling petroglyphs. For nearly 300 years, people have speculated about its origin and meaning. Investigators have been attempting to decode the odd glyphs since an English colonist first described the boulder in 1680, but they've had little success. In 1963, state officials removed the boulder and kept it for preservation. Most scholars think the stone carvings are of Native American origins. Some of the wilder theories have proposed that it was the work of the Portuguese, Chinese, or even the ancient Phoenicians. The Green Children of Woolpit were 2 children who appeared in the village of Woolpit in Suffolk, UK in the 12th century. The brother and sister had green-colored skin, even though they appeared normal in all other ways. They spoke an unrecognized language and refused to eat anything other than pitch from bean pods. Eventually, their skin lost its green color. After they learned English, they explained that they were from the land of St. Martin, which was a dark place because the sun never rose far above the horizon. They claimed that they were tending their father's herd and followed a river of light when they heard the sounds of bells. Then they arrived in Woolpit. Some of the more unusual theories proposed for the origin of the children are that they were Hollow Earth children, parallel dimension children, or extraterrestrial children. On June 30th, 1999, the body of Ricky McCormick was found in a field in St. Charles County, Missouri. McCormick had been missing for only 3 days, but his body was already badly decomposed. In 2011, the FBI revealed that they had found 2 notes in McCormick's pockets, written in a complex encrypted code. He was a high school dropout who could barely write his own name, making the whole thing even more strange. Even America's top cryptographers couldn't decrypt the text. In 1985, a metal drum containing the remains of a woman and young girl were discovered near the New Hampshire Bear Brook State Park. The 2 were related in some way, but they were never identified. 15 years later, another metal drum was discovered 100 feet away, this one containing the bodies of 2 more young girls, one of whom was related to the people found in 1985. The 4th victim, however, bore no relation to the others. The bodies had been so badly deteriorated that authorities say that they may have died as early as 1977. British Columbia Highway 16 has earned the nickname Highway of Tears because of the shocking number of women who have been murdered or gone missing from that road. From 1969 to 2006, 18 women have met that fate. The youngest victim was 12 years old. American serial killer Bobby Jack Fowler, who died in 2006, is suspected of having carried out 3 of the killings. Most of the others remain unsolved. On Christmas Eve, 1945, the house belonging to George and Jenny Sodder burnt to the ground. After the fire, 5 of their children were missing and presumed dead. However, no remains were ever found, and the fire had produced no smell of burning flesh. The fire was ruled an accident, faulty wiring on Christmas tree lights. However, the electricity in the house still worked when the fire started. In 1968, they received a bizarre note and photo, supposedly from their son Louis. The envelope was postmarked from Kentucky with no return address. The Sodders sent a private investigator to look into the matter. He disappeared and never contacted the Sodders again. The Gilgo Beach killer may still be on the loose. The Long Island serial killer, aka the Gilgo Beach killer, was responsible for at least 10 murders, maybe even as many as 17, between 1977 and 2013. Most of the dead were sex workers, but the victims also included a toddler who remains unidentified. NYPD detectives allegedly spoke to the killer by phone in 2009 and had narrowed down his location to somewhere in Times Square, but he somehow avoided the frantic search and may still be out there to this day. Number 4. Me and the girlfriend were on our way to her parents' house. I was invited to Thanksgiving dinner with them, which was a huge honor for me since I had only met her parents 3 times. I was also nervous since her grandparents and aunts and uncles would also be there who I had never met. We had a long trek from my house to her parents' house. It would be a good hour-long drive. About 45 minutes into the drive, we had to stop for gas. We pulled up into a literally dead Gulf station right off the highway, and I decided to fill up with premium for once to do my car a favor. Of course, it was cheaper to pay with cash, so I went inside with my head down as I dug my hand inside my wallet searching for a 10 and a 20, and when I pulled the bills out, I instinctively looked up and said, 30 on 2 please. But I stopped mid-sentence. There was no one there. I looked for a bell on the counter. None. I simply called out, "Anyone there?" There wasn't even a back door behind the counter that you would assume would lead to some kind of employees-only room. No, it was just completely empty. The only other door in this little gas station besides the entrance was the single bathroom, and that door was open, exposing the blackness from within the bathroom. I figured maybe whoever was manning the cash register may have just gone outside for something. I walked back outside and shrugged my shoulders at my girlfriend out of confusion. I looked around for maybe a porta potty or an ice machine or something that could be distracting a potential cashier, but there was nothing. It was a relatively small little station with foliage surrounding it in almost all directions. I figured maybe somebody could be behind the building smoking a bogey or a doobie, so I went back there as a final attempt. Nope. Just a dumpster sitting under a dimly lit roof light. Ugh, I figured I'd just pay credit at this point and turned back. But as I did, somebody from out in the woods called over to me in a kind of whispery yell. My heart skipped a beat when I heard this. Hey! Hey! I kept hearing it from the woods. I took out my phone and flipped on the flashlight just to skim the outer tree line for anybody who could be hiding in there. As my now shaking hand rotated the phone slowly, the light momentarily revealed somebody from behind a tree. I took off back to the car and stepped on it out of there. My girlfriend was scared shitless just in reaction to my fear. I told her about the bizarre thing that just happened, and from that point on, she kept looking through the rearview mirrors just to make sure we weren't being followed. We pulled up to the next gas station we could find, this time one that actually had a cashier. I paid him $30 and began filling up. A van pulled up to the pump right behind mine, and a man wearing a cap stepped out staring intently at me. I tried to act as if I didn't notice him, but when it got to the point where he was staring at me for at least 20 seconds straight, I had to look at him and ask him if there was a problem. He finally turned away. The second I was done, I hopped back in the car and took off once more. We made it to her parents' house safely, and I don't believe we were followed. Now, I wouldn't have shared this story if it weren't for the fact that a few weeks later, I did some research and found out that a 33-year-old Indian man who worked at the gas station we had stopped at had been murdered and his body was stuffed in the woods behind the station. I immediately gave the police a tip about the guy who I saw at the station who was surely caught on camera. The following year on Thanksgiving, a similar murder happened at another gas station. We have since nicknamed him the Thanksgiving Killer. I fear only the worst once more this year, as he has still not been caught. Number 3. Walmart attracts the weirdest people. It was Black Friday, meaning me and my brothers were going video game shopping. Our first and only stop was Walmart. The place was absolutely mobbed, and being Walmart, it was mobbed with the wrong kinds of people. Gross, weird, and just creepy people everywhere trying to save a few bucks on already cheap products. We rode the escalators upstairs to the video game section. I was looking for the latest Call of Duty game personally, but my brothers were looking for some other game I don't remember. Then, out of nowhere, some creepy, heavy, oldish man who smelled like vomit walked up to me and said, "You like video games, huh?" "Yeah," I said. I began to slowly slide away just to show that I wasn't interested in conversation. "My son likes video games too. Maybe you should come over and play some with him. He really craves company." The man gave me a creepy smile. "Oh, no, I'm not from around town, sorry." That's all I could think of saying. I didn't even give him a chance to keep this conversation going. Hell, I wasn't obligated to stand there and talk to this guy. I simply gave him a smile and called my brother's name out while walking away just to seem distracted. I did a quick backwards glance. He was just staring at me as I walked away. I made it to the next aisle over and immediately felt comfort in being next to my brothers. I waited around until they finally found their game and we headed over to the checkout counters. The lines were insane. I knew it would probably take 10 to 15 minutes just to make it to the counters, so I took that opportunity to check out some of the jeans and t-shirt sales. At one point, I found myself in probably the most secluded corner of the store checking out some t-shirts when someone grabbed my arm hard. I thought it was my brother messing with me, so I turned around and told him to fuck off. But it wasn't him. It was the man. I started calling for help, screaming that I didn't know this man. Some people came over and stared, but that was about it. The man let go and walked away. I don't know what he was thinking or planning on trying in such a public place. I didn't tell my brothers what happened out of embarrassment, but they picked up on the fact that I was quiet afterwards. "It's nothing," I kept telling them. We got into my brother's Camaro, and when I sat down, I looked to the entrance of the Walmart. There he fucking was, sitting at the bench, facing me. As we were leaving the lot, we had to pass right in front of the store. I got one last look at the creepy man. His head moved ever so slightly to constantly face me, even through the car window at night. I gave him the finger, but it didn't seem to influence him in the slightest. That was the last I ever saw of him. Walmart attracts the weirdest people. Number 2. It was Black Friday 2013, and I decided to be one of those people who gets up at 3 a.m. to get some early deals. Home Depot was having crazy deals on artificial Christmas trees, so I wanted to get there early and buy one for my family. They opened their doors at 3 a.m. on the spot, 3 hours earlier than usual for Black Friday. Surprisingly, only me and one other guy were waiting to get in. I guess everyone else was at Best Buy or the mall. I found a nice 9-foot-tall artificial Christmas tree, originally for $200, but at that moment half off for only $100. I asked one of the few employees working at that hour to help me carry the box to the checkout and then to my car. The parking lot was still surprisingly empty for Black Friday. I figured maybe I didn't have to come so early. I tipped the guy and got in my car ready to leave when someone knocked on my window. I lowered the window, and some guy, mid-20s, beanie, black, and tall, leaned into my window asking if I had change. I opened the little compartment in between seats where I normally keep change, and it was actually empty. I didn't want to have to hand him a 10, so I said, "Nah, man, sorry." He looked disappointed, and I actually felt bad. He then asked me if I could give him a lift to the nearest gas station. I was a bit nervous about letting a stranger in my car, but guess what? I let him in. He did not thank me, which kind of hurt, I guess because I'm a little sensitive. I asked him if he knew of any close-by gas stations. He just said, "Nah." A few seconds later, I asked him why he needed to go to a gas station, and I swear to God, he didn't answer. It's not like he didn't hear me. He just flat out ignored me. I stopped looking at him at that point because I was feeling a bit uncomfortable now. I kept driving down main and side roads, but there was no goddamn gas stations anywhere. I was trying not to look in his direction, but I could tell he was staring at me. Every turn I made, every stop sign I stopped at, he was staring at me. I was sweating now. This guy was freaking me out. I felt like at any moment he could just grab my throat and I'd be done for. At last, I could see a gas station just beyond a light which had just turned red. Why did it have to turn red just now? I thought to myself. I could still feel his stare, even as I looked the other way. I finally decided to sum up the balls and looked at him. I felt his cold, emotionless stare run straight through my eyes into my soul. Are you okay? I asked him. He ever so slightly nodded his head, almost not even noticeable. The light turned green, and I pulled into the gas station. He stepped out and stood by the sidewalk and watched me as I pulled away. When I got past the intersection, I laughed out of joy and the ridiculousness of the situation. But then I realized something. I patted myself down and then began to panic. I was missing something. My phone. I was only a few blocks away, so I made a U-turn and headed back to the gas station. He was gone already. I drove home and confirmed that my phone was missing. I knew I had left it in the cup holder of my car. My phone had all of my info on it. I contemplated calling the police, but I didn't. I couldn't even sleep that night in fear of some freak stranger having my address. The next night, after getting home from our 2-day delayed Thanksgiving dinner, I found my front door was open and my entire house was trashed. I called the police with my neighbor's phone. They didn't find him in there, but they found his prints everywhere. The only thing, the prints did not match anyone on record. Number 1. It was Thanksgiving. I had half the family over, along with the next door neighbors, Tom and his wife. They don't have a big family, so they used to come over to watch the game with us on Thanksgiving. After eating dinner, we all sat in the living room to watch football, except for my daughters Tracy and Michelle, who aren't into football. At the time, Michelle was only 13 years old, and Tracy was 16. During halftime, I decided to go up to Michelle's room to get her to come down. She finally budged and came down to the living room. Me, Tom, and a few in-laws went outside to smoke. Me and Tom talked about his son, Sam. Apparently, Sam had gone back home to be alone and watch movies. He had been with us earlier. Tom joked that he was probably just watching porn, though. I laughed. I stared up at one of the windows to my house, the window to Michelle's room. There was someone looking out the window. What the hell is Michelle doing back in her room? I thought. But then I realized that wasn't Michelle. In fact, I didn't know who the hell that was. I excused myself from the group and stormed back inside and upstairs to Michelle's room. Michelle followed after she saw me enter her room. "Did someone just come in here?" I asked. "No, why?" I looked around the room. It was completely empty. I nudged Michelle to go back downstairs while I turned off the lamp. We went back to the living room where the game would be starting up momentarily. I finally decided to ask everyone if anyone had been in Michelle's room at her window. Everyone either said no or shook their heads no. Someone had to be lying. I heard a slight thud come from upstairs in Michelle's room. I ran back upstairs, again with Michelle following me. I flicked on the lights in her room and spun around in a circle looking for someone. The sliding closet door was cracked open. I just realized. I thought I could see something through the crack. I squinted my eyes to try and see what it was. It was an eye. I screamed like a child for maybe 2 seconds, followed by Michelle. Relatives ran up into the room as I angrily slid open the closet and pulled out Sam, Tom's son. Tom ran up and found me basically holding Sam by the neck. Sam was holding some belongings of my daughter that I'd rather not talk about. This incident definitely scarred, maybe even ruined my friendship with Tom and his wife, and it's made me that much more protective over my daughter. So throughout history, there have been some ferocious creatures that have roamed the earth, and it seems the biggest and most dangerous have since gone extinct. For this list, I won't be including very well-known animals such as the Spinosaurus or T-Rex, or for the most part, any other dinosaurs. Number 10, Gigantopithecus. This creature was a monstrous ape, closely related to the orangutan that roamed the bamboo forests, jungles, and mountains of China, India, and Vietnam during the Pleistocene time period. It was a vegetarian, but still probably not a sight for sore eyes. It could grow up to 3 meters tall and weigh up to 1,200 pounds. Its strength was undoubtedly extraordinary and probably kept it safe from most predators, and it probably would not hesitate to use its strength against a human who got too close for its comfort. It went extinct 300,000 years ago, possibly due to overhunting by early humans, or as the result of climate change. Number 9, 3-foot-long scorpions. Officially known as Pomanoscorpius, these creatures were very similar to today's scorpions, but could grow up to 1 meter long and were armed with sharp claws and a venomous stinger. It's not known how deadly the venom was, but considering the large amount it injected with each attack, it was more than likely very deadly. During the time period that these things were around, there were also giant roaches the size of house cats, dragonflies the size of hawks, and millipede relatives up to 3 meters long. Number 8, giant crocodiles. If normal crocodiles weren't bad enough, there was once a creature now known as Purosaurus, which was more than twice the size of a regular crocodile. It lived in South America 8 million years ago, and would grow up to 13 meters long. That's more than twice as long as the largest species of crocodile alive today. It would be fully capable of swallowing a human whole. These giant crocodiles were capable of fighting T-Rexes and winning. Number 7, Quetzalcoatlus. Undoubtedly the most horrifying living thing to ever come from the sky, these creatures were gigantic predatory birds standing at about roughly the same height as a giraffe. Some of them had wingspans of 12 to 15 meters, making them as large as a small plane. What was rather strange about the creatures were their body proportions. They had ridiculously long legs, necks, and beaks, and very small bodies, as well as relatively short wings. Scientists believe that they did not hunt in the air, but rather walked on the ground hunting for any animal they could catch and swallow whole, and that may have included dog-sized or maybe even man-sized creatures. Number 6, Megalodon. This enormous, extinct creature is the biggest species of shark to have ever existed. It's generally thought to have looked similar to the modern great white. However, while a great white shark can grow up to be 20 feet long and over 7,000 pounds, Megalodon was estimated to be 60 feet in length, weighing anywhere from 50 to 100 tons. Megalodon only died off about 2.6 million years ago. This means that he often interacted with animals that are still around today, like giant sea turtles, porpoises, and even whales. If these guys were still around, it would just be one more reason to stay out of the ocean. Number 5, Gorgonops. Before dinosaurs came along, the planet was still full of giant, horrifying monsters. A prime example is Gorgonops, an animal that lived 260 million years ago, way before the dinosaurs became the dominant predators. At around 6 to 10 feet in length, Gorgonops was such a fast and vicious predator that it quickly rose to the top of the food chain. Of course, it also helped that Gorgonops had massive canines so large they nearly protruded beyond its lower jaw. Number 4. Terror birds. These birds were the top predators in South America and parts of North America during the Miocene, Pliocene, and early Pleistocene periods before they were replaced by big cats and other carnivorous mammals. Unlike Quetzalcoatlus, they were unable to fly, but could run very fast, some speculate as fast as a cheetah, and of course they were very large, with the largest of the species growing up to 3 meters tall and weighing up to half a ton. Their main weapon was their head, which could grow up to a meter long, allowing them to swallow prey as large as a dog in one single gulp. However, thanks to the hooked tip of the bill, which was used as a weapon, the terror birds could kill and devour prey much larger than a dog, including horses, camels, and humans if they were around at the time. Number 3. Titanoboa. Being the largest snake to ever exist, Titanoboa grew upwards of 15 meters long and weighed over a ton. It lived in the warm climates of the tropics 60 million years ago. It killed its prey by squashing it like the modern boa constrictor, and there's pretty much nothing that thing couldn't squeeze like a tube of toothpaste. Meaning, this thing would eat you like a boa constrictor would eat a guinea pig, which is why you should be happy it's extinct. Number 2. Arthropleura. If you've ever seen a centipede or millipede crawling through your backyard and you thought that was a whole lot of nope, or perhaps seen or heard of the giant centipede and thought those things were horrifying, then you might not want to know about the Arthropleura, which were massive millipedes that could grow up to 3 meters long. These things had few, if any, predators, and it's not actually known whether they themselves were predators or not, but either way, odds are you would not want to run into one of these things. And number 1, Mosasaurus. Fossil evidence suggests that Mosasaurus could reach as much as 50 feet in length, making it one of the largest marine predators of Earth's history. Mosasaurus's head was like that of a crocodile, lined with hundreds of razor-sharp teeth which could kill even the most well-armored enemies. Almost 3 times the size of the Liopleurodon, which was perhaps the next most ferocious sea predator, the Mosasaurus would be capable of eating a small boat in one bite today. My name is Ethan, and I'm a photographer. I took a trip last year with my wife to the Colorado mountains for an art project. My wife is also an avid skier, so she talked me into adding skiing into the trip. We had the option to book a room at a ski resort or rent out a private log cabin. The second one seemed more romantic, so I picked that one. Plus, it didn't hurt that it was cheaper. The cabin was nothing luxurious or anything. It was a single floor, 4-room little thing. A 2-person bedroom, a small living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. It may have been small, but the actual idea of being secluded in a warm log cabin during a blizzard was amazing. However, the storm was interfering with the cable signal, so we didn't have much to do this one particular evening. It was just starting to get dark out at this point, but there was still a decent amount of light outside, so I thought it would be perfect for getting a few shots and videos in the blizzard for backgrounds and wallpapers. I told my wife I'd be back within 10 minutes and slipped on my boots and coat. The moment I stepped outside and shut the door, I noticed footsteps leading up to the door in the snow that had blown under the wooden awning. I could see the prints doubled, as whoever left them there turned and went the opposite direction. I was freaked the fuck out, but I wasn't about to go inside and scare my wife. I decided to give in to my curiosity and followed the prints to the right side of the cabin. Right away, I noticed that they led to the bedroom window. My heart froze in fear when I saw this. I could see my wife sitting on the bed using her iPad. She noticed me and I waved. She laughed. I continued to follow the footprints around the cabin to the other side. They led to the living room window on the other side. Someone was stalking us. But how long ago was the question? I found myself standing there for a good minute asking myself if I should follow the footprints anymore. For whatever reason, I decided I would. They were now leading away from the cabin. I knew I was following the prints to where this person was going, not coming from, simply by the boot marks. I followed the prints away from the opening and into the trees. That was where I saw him. A man wearing a black coat facing a tree, slouched down looking at the ground. He was still as a statue, and I could see the snow piling up on his hood and shoulders. I froze in my tracks, trying not to make a sound. I would have thought to ask him if he needed help otherwise, but this guy was just standing there not doing anything, like some kind of deranged freak. I started to gradually move backwards without even turning around, making sure this man didn't turn around or notice me. When I got at a visual distance, I turned around and stomped through the snow back to the cabin. When I slammed the door shut, my wife came over to see what was wrong. I saw worry in her eyes. I guess she saw the worry in mine. She knew I saw something, and after a few minutes of harassment, I finally told her what I saw. She immediately started packing her things, telling me we're leaving right away. I told her no, we're not going anywhere. I would not get a refund for leaving early, and I wasn't about to up and leave just because some weird guy was walking around outside. She made a point of locking both locks on the door and making sure all of the windows were sealed shut. For the rest of the night, we read stuff on our iPads. I reviewed the pictures and videos I had taken so far. We turned out the lights early as there wasn't much else to do. What if he's still out there? I remember my wife asking me. There's no way he's still out there, I then assured her. Listening to the wind blowing outside, along with the small flakes of snow hitting the windows, was strangely relaxing, and I knew I'd be able to fall asleep quickly. Except if it wasn't for the knock at the bedroom window. We were both still awake, and we both knew it was a knock from a person. I ushered my wife out of bed and out into the living room without turning on any lights. There was nothing to use as a weapon whatsoever. Our only option was to run before something might happen. I told my wife we'd have to forget our luggage and make a dash for the Jeep. We slipped on our boots and coats in the dark in a matter of seconds, and when we heard a knock at the living room window from the opposite side of our car, we took that opportunity to run. I pressed the unlock button, so grateful I chose to have remote locks on my Wrangler, and we hopped in. The car started with ease, and as soon as the headlights flashed on, the man was standing facing the log cabin on our side now. Not a window, just facing the wall of the cabin in the same position I had seen him in earlier, as if he were hiding his face. We drove to the nearby ski resort without much trouble in the Jeep. We stayed there for the night and went back the next day to the log cabin to collect our things we left behind. He wasn't there. When I was 17 years old and I was home alone, coincidentally on the night that I tried pot for the first time, I experienced the most horrifying moment of my life. It was mid-December, during a late fall snowstorm. I was in my room with some movie on in the background, Mrs. Doubtfire if I recall correctly, though I wasn't paying attention to it. I was trying to figure out how to properly inhale without coughing. I think I spent about half an hour breathing in smoke from that pipe, yet I couldn't even tell if I felt any different. For maybe another 10 minutes I still continued at it, and finally, I felt a little different. It was a new feeling, hard to explain at the time. I felt as if the room around me felt more calming, and I was more attentive to my surroundings, or maybe less attentive, I couldn't really tell. All I know is I felt different. I was excited, I wanted to keep going. Then suddenly I felt as if I heard a sound come from downstairs. I muted my TV and listened. It sounded like there was a tapping noise coming from the front door, like a light knocking. I got nervous that it was my parents or sister, as I didn't know if I'd be noticeably acting differently or if they would be able to pick up on the smell from around the house. I headed downstairs and looked through the peephole, not to find my parents or sister, but a severely underdressed, almost homeless-looking man. To put this into perspective, we don't live in the kind of suburbs that a lot of you most likely live in. We don't exactly live in a completely desolate area either. We have neighbors, but houses are about 200 yards apart from each other, which doesn't sound like much, but it's a decent distance. So on a dark, stormy night like this where we live, with some random dirty-looking man who I'd never seen before standing on my porch, I naturally pretended I wasn't home. I stood there and kept watching through the peephole as the guy stayed put, proceeding to knock on the door again, this time louder. I knew I wasn't going to answer, so I walked back upstairs to my room and shut the door. In a sense, I felt bad, but I would never let a stranger into my house, and I couldn't imagine what else he could have wanted other than to be let in. Time passed as I continued hitting the pipe, getting more adjusted to it and starting to really feel its effects. I felt like my mind was wandering, forgetting I was even laying in my bed, or even in my bedroom for that matter, when there was a loud thud at my window. I jumped up quicker than a mousetrap when I heard it. It sounded like a rock had hit my window. I shut off the TV now, the only source of light in the bedroom. Now it was pitch black. It took me a while to connect this with the man who was at the stoop. He was out there, I was in here. There's nothing he could do to me, I somehow assured myself. However, being high only made me more paranoid and afraid of every little noise. In fact, I seemed to be more alert to every sound, even the small little house noises like random cracks in the walls. Nothing happened after a few minutes, and being in the pitch black darkness kind of tired me out. That, and apparently I just learned that pot puts you to sleep more effectively than sleeping pills. I awoke sometime later, thinking it must have been like 3 in the morning, but I looked at the clock and it said it was only 1:45. I had only been asleep for like 20 minutes. I sat up thinking I heard something from down in the den. I rubbed my eyes and then remembered the man. My heart started racing again. I was about to get up when I realized something. Across the room, there was something beyond my half-open door. I leaned in and squinted my eyes. There was somebody peering into the room at me from behind the door. I let out the most horrified and gut-wrenching scream possible as the person then emerged from the door and started walking over to my bed in the dark. I just need a warm place to stay. I had no choice but to shove him to the floor when he made it to my bed. It was then that I realized he was a very skinny and weak man. I was able to drag him up and push him to the front door with force. He tried to fight and resist, but he was too weak to do anything. He was crazy. I could see it in his eyes. I shoved him outside and locked the door and then called the cops. I stayed downstairs where he had broken the glass to get inside, just to make sure he couldn't get back in. When the cops arrived, they found him sitting in my front bushes curled up in a ball. They took him to the station, and he was no longer my problem. So do I feel bad about this today? I guess I do a little. He was undoubtedly crazy, but I don't know how dangerous he was. It was still either way the scariest experience of my life. When I was younger, me and my friends would always have big manhunt games in the snow. This one January night when we were 13 and there was this crazy blizzard going on, we continued our tradition. We had a group of 6 people playing, 3 on each team. The game was more or less tag, but it involved hiding and running to an assigned safe point, which for us was the front stoop. It was fun in the summer, but the snow only made it so much better, what with the snow adding as a hiding and slowing down factor, hunting down footprints, and even using snowballs as weapons to slow down chasers. It was the most fun game of our childhoods. Until this particular year, things turned pretty bad. It was our turn to hide. I'll give you the names of my teammates to make things more easy to follow. Dan and Christian. Dan hopped the fence to someone's backyard on the other side of the block, which wasn't really cheating as we had no limits with this game. Christian jumped on top of my other friend's shed in the backyard and hid behind the sloped roof. I thought I'd be sneaky and started running all around the backyard to create a seemingly endless trail of footprints. When our friends from the other side of the house announced that they were coming, I had to think quickly. I did something that wasn't too pleasant. First, I signaled for Christian atop the roof to run if I were to run myself, and then I hopped in the bushes and lay flat in the snow. Two of the others entered the backyard and started analyzing the crazy footprint path I created. I knew it would lead to me though, so I had to be ready to run if they got close. They were getting closer to the bushes I was hiding in, so Christian jumped down from the shed into the snow and darted for the front lawn. The two chased after him in both directions. I knew the stoop would be guarded right now, so I took this opportunity to better hide myself. I decided to follow Dan's approach and hopped onto the roof of the shed, then over the fence to that backyard on the other side of the block. I didn't see Dan anywhere though. I looked for his footprints, but quickly found some other kind of tracks in the snow. By the fence were a few boot marks from where Dan must have landed, but then quickly the marks turned to a steady trail of something being pushed or dragged through the snow. I followed the trail to the back door of the pitch-black house, and then it stopped. I quickly put two and two together, and my heart sank. I turned and headed back for the fence to hop over and call for my friend's parents, but about halfway across the yard, I heard the sliding door to the house open, and someone wearing a black coat with a hood covering their face emerged and started stomping over to me. I screamed like a girl as I pulled myself up over the fence, just barely making it before he could grab my legs. All my friends came running into the backyard. Then shortly after, my friend's parents came out the back door. I told them what happened, and the mom phoned the police, while the dad stormed to the other side of the block with a gun and knocked on the door. There was no answer, so he let himself in as we watched. The door was unlocked. He had us wait outside, and within a few minutes, came out with Dan in his arms. He was knocked out. His face looked red and wounded, as if he were hit in the face by a shovel or something. There was no car in the driveway, indicating the guy left when I escaped his yard. He never returned to his house, and I'm pretty sure he's still wanted by police to this day. It just goes to show, anybody out there, even your next-door neighbor, may be a predator, just waiting for an opportunity to strike. So we were having our Christmas Eve dinner. Turkey, stuffing, and other dishes that you would expect to get on Thanksgiving night. We don't have a big family. It was my grandparents and uncles from my mom's side of the family. At the time, we lived in a duplex with some guy and his girlfriend on the other side. We never really saw them much. Strangely, we had a door that connected our sides, and no, that's not something that most duplexes have. It had a very unique kind of lock though. It had to be unlocked from both sides to be opened, and it could open in either direction. I only saw it open once before the two moved in, ever since the door had been locked, at least on our side. While we were sitting at the dinner table eating, the doorknob to the door that separates the sides of our duplex twisted and turned before the lock would block it. It was not accidental, as it was going on for at least 10 seconds. My dad got up and walked over to the door, placed one hand on the lock and one hand on the doorknob. "You need something?" There was no answer. He unlocked our side of the door and swung it open. Their side of the duplex was completely pitch black. It seemed as if nobody was home. It was only about 6 o'clock, and we were certain we saw them leaving earlier. Me and my dad went to check out the window, and their car was gone too. Being good neighbors, we assumed the worst, that there may have been an intruder, so me, my dad, and my uncle went to the other side to investigate. We flipped on all the lights and checked every corner and every crevice of the small first floor. Then we heard a thud and a crack from upstairs. It was pressure on the floorboards. I was freaked out, so I stayed behind while my dad and uncle ran upstairs. I felt my heart skip a beat when a huge commotion erupted from upstairs, before the scream from my uncle echoed across the duplex even to the other side as my whole family got up from the table now. Moments later, my dad came rushing down with my uncle beside him, with his hand covering his lower shoulder or chest area. There was a stab wound. We all hurried back to our side of the apartment and locked the door. We dialed 911 and simultaneously heard rapid stomping coming from the other side, and then heavy banging and ramming into the door to the point where there were small chips and cracks forming. We could hear the grunting and screaming of the man as he rammed into the door. My other uncle and my dad each grabbed kitchen knives. I armed myself as well. They told all of us to stand back while they waited by the door. Thankfully, the man on the other side gave up before the door gave in, and we heard him exit out the front door. We watched through the window, and we all saw his face as he ran through the snow and turned to see us through the glass. He took off in his black Honda Civic down the slushy roads. It doesn't end there. The following year, the same neighbors still lived there, and they seemed to be having a Christmas get-together with a few people. By chance, I was looking out my bedroom window, being a sketchy snoop, when I recognized one of their guests to be the same man who had allegedly broken into their side of the duplex. When I told my dad, he agreed, and we approached them about it. He denied any knowledge of what we said, and even our neighbors defended him, saying he was from out of state. There was nothing we could do for proof, but we knew one thing. Those neighbors, for whatever reason, set that up. We moved out about a month later after our new-grown fear of those neighbors became too much. This happened when I was only 5 years old. It was Christmas Eve night, meaning I guess it was technically Christmas, and I had awoken at probably 3 a.m. or something. I walked downstairs to the living room out of my little boy curiosity to see if Santa had delivered any presents yet. The tree was full of presents underneath already. I was so happy. Santa had come already. But what was this? There was someone in the kitchen going through the fridge. I remember stepping into the kitchen and seeing a really tall man going through the fridge chugging a milk carton. When he spotted me, he put the carton back in the fridge and shut the door. He then put his fingers on his lips to tell me to be quiet. Are you Santa? I asked him. Yes, I am, he told me quietly. He walked past me, patted me on the head, and stepped into the living room next to the tree. I don't know what I was thinking, even at 5 years old, as he wasn't wearing anything even resembling Santa. He looked around at all the gifts. I thanked him for all the presents as he began picking up the bigger boxes. I remember being confused, and I'm pretty sure I asked him why he was doing what he was doing, but I don't remember exactly what he said. I believe it was along the lines of just replacing the gifts with better ones in my sled. I believed whatever he said though. He walked out the back door with 3 boxes, came back momentarily to grab more, then left once again. He came back in and patted me on the back and told me not to tell my parents that I saw him. I smiled and agreed, and he took off with the boxes. I waited for him to come back with the replacement gifts, but he never did. I eventually went up to tell my parents despite what he said. When my parents realized I wasn't joking, they sat up in shock and fear and ran past me downstairs. When they saw half the presents were gone and the back door was left wide open, my mom screamed like a deranged person. I remember my parents were practically scolding me, demanding for me to describe the person who entered our house. Of course, being 5 years old, the description I gave was anything but useful. All I probably told them was that he was tall. It's been almost 15 years now though, and at this point for me, being that I was only 5 years old, it's nothing but a story to tell, rather than a bad memory at all. Did you ever used to have a fear of those guys who would dress up as Santa Claus in the mall or at Christmas parties? Up until the age of about 8, I certainly did. I think I was 6 or 7 years old when me and my mom were walking through the mall with all of the Christmas festivities and decorations up. Festive bands playing jingle bells, a giant tree in the center of the mall, and of course a mall Santa sitting in a chair covered by a green blanket. There was a small line of kids and parents waiting to sit on the Santa's lap, maybe 2 or 3 kids. My mom insisted I sat on his lap. Normally it would be the other way around, the kid begging the parent to sit on the lap, but she knew how shy I was. There wasn't anyone by the mall Santa's side, like one of those people who calls the next child up. It was just him. When I sat on the stranger's lap, he grabbed me by the chest and said softly in my ear, "What do you want for Christmas?" I think I said a Game Boy Advance. He laughed and assured me I would receive one. Then, for whatever reason, my mom walked up to the Santa and said something quietly to him. He chuckled in response to whatever she said and then said no problem. My mom told me to wait there by the Santa for a few minutes until she came back. At this point, there were no more kids waiting to sit on his lap, so his attention was directed at me. He told me to come over and sit on his lap again. I somehow obeyed, despite my fear of Santa Claus. When I sat on his lap, he pulled me closer to him so that my back was leaning on him. When I think back on this moment now, it's all the more painful and creepy. He then whispered in my ear that he had a Game Boy Advance outside by his sled, and if I followed him, I would get it right now and wouldn't have to wait until Christmas. My fear suddenly turned to excitement as I believed him. We both stepped off the chair, and I followed him down one of the exit hallways, but halfway through, he stopped and told me we should take a bathroom break first. We stepped into the bathroom, and he quickly locked the door. I turned and looked at him as he looked at me. But before anything else could happen, there was a frantic banging at the door. Somebody on the other side was yelling to open up. The Santa opened the door and a man pulled him out and shoved him. The man then escorted me back to the center of the mall, asking me where my mom went. I watched as a fake Santa casually walked out the exit door and out of my sight. When my mom came back, the man explained everything. I'm pretty sure he was watching the whole time. So he and my mom asked around to see if the mall hired any mall Santas for the day. They did not. Whoever that was just a pervert dressed as Santa to get kids to sit on his lap and possibly wait for a perfect opportunity to snatch one, just like he almost did me. This story took place about 5 years ago on Christmas Eve night. It was around 1 in the morning, and I had just finished placing presents under the tree. I went upstairs to brush up and everything, then came back downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water before bed. My son Jake, who was 4 at the time, was standing by the stairs leading to the basement. I asked him what he was doing up so late. He pointed down the stairs and said, "Santa." I picked him up and carried him back to his room. I took a glass of water and went to bed. I woke up around an hour later to my son running down the hall outside my room. I sighed and got out of bed. As I was going down the stairs, I saw Jake by the tree looking at presents. Then he ran past me into the basement stairs again. He pointed down the stairs again. This time I looked down the stairwell, and my heart dropped as I saw a black figure sitting on the bottom step. I almost screamed, but I somehow held it in. I pulled my son quietly away from the basement door and closer to the front door of the house. I moved my hand away from my son's mouth to reach for the lock in the doorknob. I tried to pull the door open as quietly as possible, but it was pointless. The squeaky hinges let out the usual ear-piercing screeches, and I cringed in my mouth and eyes as I did. Suddenly, there were heavy stomps coming from up the basement stairs. I screamed and pushed open the storm door and practically threw Jake outside. I shut both doors behind us and we ran to the neighbor's house. I rang the doorbell as fast as possible, probably 30 times before they answered. After that, we went inside and stayed there and waited for the police. Whoever that person was gone though, as determined after the police conducted a thorough investigation of the house. I ended up lying to Jake, telling him that actually was Santa Claus, but a few years later, he remembered the incident and became a little more wise to what actually happened.